Welcome back to Richard Hale. If you are new here, stick around because today's coverage is something you genuinely do not want to miss. We are talking about Iran, and things are escalating in ways that most people are not fully grasping yet. The situation on the ground is moving fast, the stakes could not be higher, and there is a lot to break down, so let us get straight into it. The Iranian people are officially calling the regime's bluff. Despite terrifying threats of a brutal crackdown, despite shoot-to-kill orders being issued by paranoid security forces, Iranians did something extraordinary. They flooded the streets to celebrate the ancient festival of fire. And for a regime that is already on the brink of collapse, this is not just a political headache, this is a full-blown crisis. Because what the regime fears more than anything else right now is that this nationwide celebration becomes the spark, the single ignition point that sets off a massive, unstoppable revolution it can no longer contain. And that is exactly why, ever since this war began, the Iranian regime has been doing something that tells you everything you need to know about how deeply terrified they truly are. They have been sending text messages to ordinary Iranian citizens, daily text messages, carrying one and the same chilling warning. If you take to the streets, the blow will be harder than what happened in January. Let that sink in for a moment. January, when the regime killed tens of thousands of its own people. Tens of thousands of Iranian citizens killed by their own government simply for standing in the street and demanding better. And now, that same government is using that massacre as a threat, as a deterrent, essentially looking its own people in the eye and saying, "We did it before, we will do it again, and this time it will be worse." The regime absolutely cannot afford a repeat of January, because in January, millions of Iranians poured into the streets and demanded something that shook the very foundations of the Islamic Republic. They demanded regime change, not economic reform, not a change in policy. They wanted the entire system gone. And that is the ultimate nightmare scenario for the people who are still sitting at the top of that crumbling, desperate structure. So, in an attempt to prevent history from repeating itself, the IRGC and Basiji forces have deployed security checkpoints across the entire country. Not in select cities, across the entire country. The scale of the surveillance and intimidation being deployed right now is staggering. And here is one detail that says more than any statistic could. One Iranian woman who spoke to the BBC described being too afraid to wear colorful clothes in public. Colorful clothes, because she was genuinely worried that even something that harmless, something as quietly human as putting on a bright shirt, might be enough to irritate a security officer and draw their attention toward her. Think carefully about what that tells you. The regime is so paranoid, so rattled, so aware of how thin its grip on the population has become, that it does not even want people wearing bright colors outside. That is not the behavior of a government firmly in control. That is the behavior of a government that knows, deep down, that it is losing. And last night was one of the most dangerous nights from the regime's perspective in recent memory. It was Chaharshanbe Suri, the ancient Persian festival of fire. This is one of the oldest and most beloved traditions in Iranian culture, a celebration stretching back thousands of years, rooted in the pre-Islamic Persian calendar, which predates the Islamic Republic by millennia. On this night, Iranians traditionally take to the streets. They dance, they chant, they light bonfires, and they celebrate the arrival of spring and the renewal of life. It is not a political act. It is a profoundly human one, a cultural expression of identity that belongs to the Iranian people, not to any government, and certainly not to this one. But the regime was absolutely adamant that no one should step outside. They were terrified, genuinely, viscerally terrified, that this celebration could snowball into something dramatically larger. And their fear is not without historical basis, because that is precisely what happened in January. If you remember, the January protests did not begin as a revolution. They started with something much more ordinary. They started because of economic pain, because people were suffering under corruption so severe it had eaten through every layer of the system, because people were struggling to afford food, to pay rent, to simply survive, and they had reached their absolute limit. That was the spark, a small, furious flame of economic frustration, and within days, it transformed into a nationwide uprising demanding the complete removal of the regime. The personal had become political, and the political had become existential. That is the trajectory the Islamic Republic is now doing everything in its power to prevent from repeating. So they issued their warnings, they set up their checkpoints, they sent their text messages, they deployed their security forces at maximum alert, they put the police chief on state television every single night to remind the country that weapons were loaded and trigger fingers were ready. They did absolutely everything within their power to keep people locked inside their homes. And people went out anyway. This happened right across the country. In Tehran, some of the largest crowds since January gathered in the streets. People were out there celebrating, dancing, chanting. Despite every single warning, despite the checkpoints on every major road, despite knowing that security forces had been explicitly authorized to open fire, despite receiving text messages threatening consequences worse than January, they still came out. That is defiance on a scale that the regime should be extremely afraid of. Now, I want to be completely honest with you about something important here because this channel has always been about giving you the real picture. We do not have a large volume of footage coming out of Iran right now, and that is entirely by design. The regime has imposed catastrophically severe internet restrictions over the past several days. They are specifically and aggressively cracking down on people who provide access to unfiltered internet, a service that had become a critical lifeline for young tech-savvy Iranians trying to stay connected with the outside world. It is a dangerous service to provide. It is also expensive, and the people providing it are precisely the kind of young, educated, digitally connected Iranians that the regime fears most. So they are being hunted down. Because of this crackdown, most people inside Iran simply cannot communicate effectively with the outside world right now. They cannot upload footage. They cannot send messages through secure channels. The deliberate throttling of information is severe enough that we are only seeing the tiniest fraction of what is actually unfolding on the ground inside that country. And even that fraction is already deeply disturbing. Last night, credible reports came through indicating direct clashes between security forces and citizens celebrating in Tehran, specifically around the main square. And there were accounts of gunfire, not warning shots fired into the air. Gunfire, directed at people who had come outside to celebrate an ancient cultural festival with their families and neighbors. This, unfortunately, is not a surprise. The Iranian police chief has been appearing on state television every single night since this war began, and every night he has looked into the camera and delivered the exact same message to his own country. The security forces have their finger on the trigger, and they will not hesitate to use their weapons. He has been saying this repeatedly, deliberately, and loudly, because the repetition of a threat is itself a form of terror. Now, there was real and genuine hope, particularly among the millions of Iranians in the diaspora watching and praying from outside, that Chaharshanbe Suri could become the starting gun for a new protest movement. But from what we are seeing on the ground right now, that does not appear to be where this is heading, at least not yet. The security apparatus of the Iranian state still has a stranglehold firm enough to prevent mass mobilization from tipping into open revolution. People are afraid. And that fear is rational. This regime has demonstrated beyond any doubt that it is willing to massacre its own population to preserve itself. But here is what I want you to hold on to. The people came out anyway. Even knowing about the text messages, even knowing about the checkpoints, even knowing there was a real possibility of being shot, they still came out. And that tells you something profound, something that no security crackdown can erase, about where the spirit of the Iranian people actually stands right now. Before I go further, I want to hear from you, so drop your answer in the comments. Here is my first question. Do you think the next major Iranian uprising is still weeks away, or do you believe the breaking point is already closer than most analysts are willing to admit? I read through the comments on this channel personally, and the conversations here regularly bring perspectives that genuinely inform how I cover these stories. So tell me what you think. Now let us move to another significant development happening simultaneously on the ground. What we are observing is Israeli drone operations specifically targeting regime members and security personnel actively deployed on the streets. And this is producing a real, if still limited, psychological and operational impact on those security forces. Some of the checkpoints set up across the country have been physically relocated, moved under bridges and overpasses to provide overhead cover from drone strikes. There are reports of security personnel sleeping in the streets rather than returning to their posts. And there are accounts of officers fleeing the moment they hear the sound of a drone overhead. Think about that image. The people assigned to intimidate and terrorize Iranian citizens are themselves walking around in fear of what is circling above them. The intimidators are being intimidated, and that psychological reversal matters, even if the operational impact remains relatively small. However, and I want to be very clear about this, because being honest matters more to me than giving you the most satisfying version, we need to keep proportion here. The Basiji forces alone number somewhere between 300,000 and 600,000 personnel. These drone strikes are eliminating individuals, 2 here, 4 there. And while every single one of those engagements matters, and while the cumulative psychological toll should not be dismissed, the Iranian internal security apparatus remains a massive and deeply entrenched machine. It has not fractured, and the Iranian people are right to remain cautious. Now, yesterday, this channel covered the killing of Ali Larijani, the de facto leader of Iran. This was a seismic event. And following that coverage, the first official public response from the Iranian government came through. The foreign minister stepped forward to address it directly. His message was carefully constructed and predictable in its framing, but revealing in what it admits between the lines. The foreign minister stated plainly that the assassination of Iran's top security official will not set the government back. He spoke about what he described as Iran's strong political structure, its established institutions, its layered bureaucracy, and argued that the removal of any single individual, no matter how senior, cannot affect the fundamental architecture of the system. Some individuals are more influential than others, he acknowledged, but the system, he insisted, is solid. I will be straight with you. That is precisely what a foreign minister is paid to say. The question that actually matters is whether it reflects reality on the ground. And based on what we are now hearing through unconfirmed but credible channels, the answer appears to be not entirely. Reports are emerging, and I want to clearly emphasize these are unconfirmed, that the Iranian president has been privately telling foreign counterparts, including leaders in Turkey and Russia, that he has no real authority inside Iran. He is reportedly telling these leaders that he does not control the system. Reading between the lines, he appears to be signaling to the international community that he is not a meaningful target, that removing him would change nothing. And here is the critical context. That claim is actually credible. Even before this war started, before any of the current assassinations, before the 12-day war last year, it was already well established that the Iranian president occupies one of the more moderate positions within the regime's internal hierarchy. This was documented before any of this happened. I also want to address a media trend I have been watching with increasing concern. There is a pattern emerging where any Iranian official who is assassinated is automatically labeled a moderate after the fact. It has become almost an automatic reflex, and most of the time that label is not accurate. It is narrative framing applied retroactively. But in the case of the current Iranian president, the moderate designation is actually substantively correct and predates the current conflict entirely, which likely explains why the U.S. State Department, when it released what was essentially a public wanted list offering up to $10 million for information on Iranian leaders, chose not to include the Iranian president on that list. The State Department does not consider him a primary target, and it seems reasonable to conclude that Israel is operating under a similar assessment. Going after him would cost more than it gains. Let us now turn to the latest update from United States Central Command. Admiral Brad Cooper, who has been providing regular operational briefings on Operation Epic Fury, released his most recent statement. Before getting into operational details, he took a moment to honor the American service members who died in the KC-135 aerial refueling aircraft incident last week. Those were real people who made the ultimate sacrifice, and their families deserve to know their service is remembered. On the operational side, Cooper reported that over 16 days of sustained operations, U.S. forces conducted a large-scale precision strike on Karg Island, destroying more than 90 Iranian military targets. These included storage bunkers for naval mines, surface-to-surface missiles, and other military infrastructure. He also confirmed that Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps aviators have collectively flown more than 6,000 combat sorties since the operation began. 6,000 combat flights. That is an operational tempo that Iran simply cannot match. But the most strategically significant element of Cooper's briefing was his detailed account of what the U.S. military is calling the systematic dismantling of Iran's defense industrial base. This goes beyond destroying weapons. This is about destroying the capacity to produce weapons. Cooper described specific facilities confirmed destroyed: a naval drone storage facility near the Strait of Hormuz, an attack drone production factory inside Tehran, and the Yazdi military depot. a facility used by the IRGC's Missile Command infrastructure to manufacture both light and heavyweight torpedoes. Each of those facilities is now gone. The distinction Cooper was making deserves to be fully appreciated. There's a fundamental difference between shooting down a missile that has already been launched and destroying the factory that built it, the warehouse where the next batch was stored, and the supply chain that kept the entire production apparatus running. The former is defense. The latter is the surgical elimination of future capability. And that is precisely what is being executed right now. Cooper also confirmed that more than 100 Iranian naval vessels have been destroyed, and that operations in and around the Strait of Hormuz are continuing with the specific objective of eliminating Iran's ability to threaten international shipping through that vital waterway. And then there is a passage from his briefing that deserves to sit with you. Over the last 2 weeks, the Iranian regime has launched attacks against a list of countries that should alarm anyone paying attention: Oman, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Jordan, Cyprus, Turkey, Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iraq, Kuwait, and Bahrain. More than 300 attacks across 11 countries, and in each case, those attacks were deliberately aimed at civilians. Among those attacks, Iranian forces deployed cluster munitions against civilian neighborhoods in Tel Aviv. Cluster munitions are a category of weapon that most of the international community has moved to ban precisely because they are inherently indiscriminate. They do not hit one target. They scatter submunitions across a wide area and are designed to maximize casualties without precision. Using that kind of weapon against a residential neighborhood is not a military operation gone wrong. It is a deliberate choice. And there is a specific legal term for that. It is a war crime. Cooper closed by recognizing the 50,000 Americans currently deployed across the region in support of this operation, and specifically called out the logistical and sustainment teams who keep munitions, fuel, and critical supplies flowing to frontline warfighters continuously, around the clock, across distribution networks spanning thousands of miles. That foundation is what makes everything else possible. Now, before I close out today's coverage, here is my second question for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Given everything covered today, the Iranian people defying the regime in the streets, the drone strikes chipping away at the security forces, the assassination of Larijani, and the systematic destruction of Iran's entire military production infrastructure, do you genuinely believe the Islamic Republic can survive the next 6 months intact? Or are we already watching in real time the beginning of the end of a 40-year-old regime? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I want to read what you actually think. And if you are watching this and have not yet subscribed to Richard Hale, now is the right time. This channel covers stories the way they deserve to be covered, without the spin, without the agenda, and without dumbing it down. If that is what you are here for, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means you will never miss a development when it breaks. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay sharp. Thank you for being here.